Of President Reagan and what says burger break. President Reagan made an unexpected stop at a McDonald's in Tuscaloosa, Alabama yesterday. But the headline just to the left of that, political zingers fly on weapons dump. Story by Ann DeVroy and John Omsinski, I believe. And it says the presidential candidates turned up the heat Monday with Ronald Reagan roasting his opponent with one-liners in the South and Walter Mondale skewering the president's toxic waste policies from a radioactive dump in Missouri. Joseph Sobran, senior editor with the National Review, are we entering a new stage of this campaign where we're going to see more heated debate?
Yes, you're actually going to hear the president use Walter Mondale's name.
And why is that different?
Well, so far he's been avoiding mentioning him by name, until the debate, that is. And after that, he's had to be much more aggressive in order to defend himself. He can't be above the battle he's in anymore.
Once again, let me finish reading from that story. As I go to the second paragraph of the story, it says, in Alabama, Reagan charged Mondale with a, quote, reign of error, end of quote, ranging from a, quote, knee-jerk yen for tax increases, end of quote, to endangering the national security. But near St. Louis, a newly confident Mondale warned the president to take the modified advice of old-time baseball player Satchel Paige, and, quote, don't look back, somebody's gaining on you. What do you think of these kind of lines? President Reagan saying that Mondale would have a reign of error, and also former Vice President Walter Mondale quoting from Satchel Paige in his campaign.
Well, it's more interesting than the sort of platitudinous campaign we had a few weeks ago, where Mondale was attacking and the president was ignoring it. How profound it is another matter, of course, but after all, we watch campaigns for fun, not for profundity.
Is that what all this is about? Instead of seeing increased debate on the issues, we're seeing just more talk?
Well, you see a certain kind of debate on the issues, I think. You see a kind of pointing toward the issues. Oddly enough, neither candidate really wants to debate what I think are the absolutely fundamental issues in a certain way, because politics doesn't admit of all that much purity on either side. So I think simply because they don't want to be held to a standard of consistency, they're not going to be too principled.
Our guest this morning is Joseph Sobran, and he is the senior editor of this magazine, National Review, which is a biweekly publication. You can get it almost anywhere, actually anywhere in the country. I take that back. Joseph Sobran has been with the National Review for the last 12 years. He is also a columnist, and which is carried by the Universal Press Syndicate. How often do you write a column?
Twice a week.
Twice a week. His education consists of a degree from Eastern Michigan University with a degree in English in 1969. He has done graduate work, and he is originally from Ypsilanti, Michigan. Phone lines are open for viewers in all areas of the country. This is our morning 9 a.m. call-in show, and for our regular viewers, they know that each day at this time we take a look at the headlines on the morning newspapers, bring in a journalist to talk about the headlines and also talk about the news business and how politics is covered around the country. Get out your morning newspaper and give us a call. We're interested to see how your paper is covering the campaigns. Those numbers are there at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to use those numbers. I'm going to hold up the front page of the Washington Times and take a look at how it covers the morning news. And you see across the very top of the paper, Mondale called national security danger. And over to the right it says, Bush blasts Democrats' scare tactics. And it says, Dateline Seal Beach, Vice President George Bush put a new tough front on the Reagan-Bush campaign yesterday, accusing the Democrats of demagoguery, cheap shots, and, quote, needlessly frightening our senior citizens, end of quote. Do you think that's happening, Joseph Sobran?
Oh, to some extent. Demagoguery is normal in democratic politics, I'm afraid. But the real issue in this campaign, I think, goes way deeper than either candidate has indicated, and I think the lines are drawn. I don't think the campaign is going to make all that much difference in any case. People aren't going to vote on toxic waste.
This is, once again, the front page of the Times, and the story, Challenger hits Reagan's toxic waste record, a story which Joseph Sobran just referred to. And in Dateline St. Charles, Missouri, Walter F. Mondale saying his campaign is, quote, red hot, end of quote. Yesterday used the words of the late Satchel Paige to warn President Reagan, quote, don't look back, somebody may be gaining on you, end of quote. The Democratic presidential nominee who focused his campaign on toxic waste issues yesterday said that the first presidential debate in Louisville was the beginning of the, quote, victory march of the Mondale-Ferraro campaign, end of quote. Joseph Sobran, let's talk for a minute about environment or specific toxic waste. You do or do not think that's what makes up voters, that's what helps voters make up their mind, issues like that?
Well, it's not a very resonant issue. I mean, pollution is a form of aggression. No question about that. I mean, nobody has the right to poison your water and your air. On the other hand, since everyone's against it in principle, I don't know how red hot it is. Most people don't feel that their water and air is threatened to a critical degree at the moment. I think these are sort of symbolic issues. They point toward a deeper issue about how society is going to be organized. I don't believe in discrete issues for the most part, at least not nowadays. In other words, I don't believe that most people vote on the basis of who is closer to the mark on, say, 7 out of 12 issues. I don't think people make up their minds that way. I think everybody has some kind of secret and maybe unarticulate vision of how society ought to be arranged. And politics plays a big part in the arrangements of society. In other words, for instance, should the government be taking care of us more than it is, or is this not a proper function of government? Or shall we say, is this a proper central function of government, as Walter Mondale thinks it is, or more or less an emergency function of government, as Ronald Reagan thinks it is? So all these other issues revolve around some big central principle like that.
What about the voters in St. Charles, Missouri who have a toxic waste dump in their neighborhood?
Well, that's different. If you've got it right there, then you're going to vote on the basis of that. But since most people don't, it's not going to be decisive nationwide.
The former Vice President Walter Mondale quotes in saying that there are over 700 toxic waste dumps. So will that be the central issue in 700 communities around the country?
Not necessarily. There are a lot of people living next door to toxic waste dumps who will vote for Ronald Reagan, and there are lots of people who don't, who will vote for Walter Mondale. That's why I say it's a sort of symbolic issue, because it's the symbolism you attach to that toxic waste dump, in a sense. Do you see this as accidentally related to Reagan's presidency or not? That's what's really critical, I think.
Now, in 1980, there was a lot of talk about single-issue politics, that there were special interest groups and people who were deciding who they'd vote for strictly on how the candidate voted, let's say, on abortion, or the B-1 bomber, or the MX, or the environment. Do you think that is gone? That was 4 years ago, and today that is not the case?
Well, I thought it was a misnomer at all times. I mean, there was single-issue politics in the 60s, civil rights or Vietnam or whatever. George McGovern said that people should vote in '72 strictly on the Vietnam issue. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but the reason people do vote on single issues like this is either a narrow-minded concern for their own self-interest. For instance, if you belong to some lobby, you vote for the guy who favors your lobby, oil or whatever. On the other hand, most people, on something like abortion, most people who view that as critical do so because they think it epitomizes one of these great principles I talk about. And I do think people are a lot more principled than they admit. They talk as if they're reading the papers and getting informed all the time. They read the papers, but not to get informed. They read them to get ammunition for their own side, in essence, on prejudice in a way.
This is the inside of the Washington Post, and it's a story called Surviving Iowa Politics. Just bumbling along, Jepsen marches on. And C-SPAN viewers know we started our campaign coverage at the Des Moines Register in downtown Des Moines, Iowa. And it's a story about the race between Senator Jepsen and also Representative Harkin. And it starts out Iowa City, Iowa. By all conventional standards, this state's new right conservative Senator Roger Jepsen should be politically dead. Few politicians in Iowa history have found themselves in so many embarrassing situations. Few have seemed so bumbling. But Jepsen, considered the most vulnerable of all Republican senators, even before a flap over a 1977 visit to an X-rated health spa, has risen from the political grave and now is given a 50-50 chance to win re-election to a second term. I'd like to quote now from what both Harkin and Jepsen say about this campaign. Down a little further in the article, it says, Jepsen also has suggested that Harkin has liberal friends who don't believe in such basic Midwestern institutions as land-grant colleges, hot dogs, and 4-H clubs, and he has told Iowans that Democratic presidential candidate Walter Mondale, quote, refuses to eat red meat, end of quote, raising, quote, serious questions about how faithfully he would represent the farm state of Iowa. Any comment, Joseph Sobran, about this kind of campaigning?
It seems unbelievably trivial in a way, refuses to eat red meat. I don't know how often he said that or how much importance he attaches to that. But Mondale not eating red meat?
As I'll go on to, and we'll listen to what Representative Harkin has had to say about Senator
Excuse me,
Jepsen.
it can't be his position that Walter Mondale should be forced to eat red meat, can it?
The story goes on to say, Harkin, 44, a 5-term congressman, has replied in kind, and this race has degenerated into a messy, if not downright silly personality contest that blurs the stark ideological differences between the two candidates. Harkin has called Jepsen, quote, Red Ink Roger, a man who, quote, parades as a conservative but is the biggest spending senator in Iowa history. His television commercials mock Jepsen, quote, when 2 Iowa farmers drove a tractor all the way to Washington to talk to him about farm debt, Roger Jepsen fell asleep, end of quote. Are we going to see more kind of campaigning of this nature around the country?
Yes, it will intensify until the day of the election.
Is it good politics?
Well, I don't know. It's part of the Democratic pageant, if pageant is a word for something so disorderly as that. But, oh, it's amusing, it's fun and everything, but I thought the reporter called it right. He said that it was disguising the stark ideological difference between these two candidates. I'd vote for Jepsen on principle. I really dislike Geraldine Ferraro as a persona. I find her very grating, and yet if she were on my side, I'd vote for her, and I probably wouldn't find her that grating.
Our guest is Joseph Sobran, and he's senior editor of this magazine, a biweekly, the National Review. And this is the October 19th issue that you're taking a look at. Let's go to the phones. Little Rock, Arkansas, do you have your morning newspaper?
Yes, good morning. I do. I have the Arkansas Democrat.
What's on the front page today?
There's an interesting story about George Bush yesterday. In the debate, he said something to the effect that the Democrats had, Walter Mondale had accused the American soldiers of dying in shame. And it was interesting. Mondale said, you ought to apologize. And Bush, there's a story about Bush, and it says that Bush went to the dictionary, and a definition of humiliation is, in the dictionary, degradation and shame, which I thought was a pretty good comeback by the Vice President, because it did seem that Vice President Mondale was putting a little bit too much criticism on our boys who gave their lives, to keep the peace over there. I do have a question for Mr. Sobran. Oh, by the way, I wonder how Mr. Mondale can say he never eats red meat, but one of his slogans is, where's the beef? I mean, what's he going to do with it when he gets it if he doesn't eat it? I would like to ask Mr. Sobran, I sat down last week and I put a pencil to Mondale's tax plan according to some figures that I saw in Time magazine. I wonder if he could comment. I make $30,000 a year. I'm a single guy. And if his tax plan goes into practice, I'm going to have to pay $500 to $650 extra a year. And I just like to ask him, is that going to be necessary? I mean, is that a good policy?
Well, I think Mr. Mondale is betting everything that supply-side economics is wrong, for one thing. He assumes that Reaganomics has nothing to do with the recovery. Now, if he's wrong, his tax plan will be a disaster from a macroeconomic point of view. It'll cause recession again and so forth. More fundamentally, at the level of principle, not economics now, I wonder where Mr. Mondale would draw the line. Is there any point at which he would say Americans are overtaxed?
That's right.
Again, his principle seems to me to be redistribution, that those who produce should support those who don't. Now, you've got to draw the line somewhere. I can see as an emergency measure government supporting some, in the same way I can see using a crowbar for self-defense, but you don't want a poison-tipped crowbar. You don't want to design a crowbar for that specific use, and you don't want to misshape government for the sake of an emergency function. You could do that when you have to do it. Otherwise, you should try not to do it. Mr. Mondale doesn't try not to do it. His answer to everything is spend and tax. It's very simple. His record is absolutely consistent as far as I know.
Front page of USA Today. This is a business-related story, but it says cut and prime keeps market on a climb. The story says Bankers Trust Company of New York cuts its prime lending rate Monday to 12.25% from 12.75%, pushing stock prices higher as investors hoped other banks would follow suit today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at 1202.96, up 12 points, its fourth consecutive daily rise. That's an obvious economic or business story, but it seems it'll have direct political impact on this campaign. What do you think, Joseph Sobran?
Well, I'm all for a boom, but I guess I'd just have to say again that I really think we're voting on matters of principle. In other words, even if I thought that Mr. Reagan weren't competent on economics, I think I'd like him better just because he believes in the reduced role of government. I don't think that the purpose of government is even to produce prosperity. I think good government tends to do that, but I don't think government should be in charge of the economy in the way it's generally expected to be now.
But if interest rates continue to decline, do you think that'll help President Reagan?
Oh, sure. Anything like that helps him as long as people are voting on that basis. I'm just saying I wouldn't, not to that extent.
Evanston, Illinois, good morning. You're on the air. Do you have your morning newspaper?
Carl, I'm sorry. I don't read either the Tribune or the Sun-Times.
Okay.
I sometimes look at the local press, the weekly press.
What's the name of your weekly?
I do read. It's called the Evanston Review.
Okay.
And it's currently a Times subsidiary, but I understand Times trying to unload it.
I see.
Carl, last time we talked was at the National Convention. I would like to tell a little story about the National Review, and then I have a couple of questions. I'd like a little colloquy with your guest.
Sure.
National Review is something that I've been interested in a distant way for a long time. When I first became aware of the magazine in about June of 1960, it was a very new magazine at that time, and I went to my public library and I said, "Where's the National Review?" And it wasn't there. And the librarian immediately subscribed to it. It's probably been filling shelves with it ever since. At that time, the people that made me aware of it were involved in organizing some of the early chapters of the John Birch Society. I was very pleased in later years when the National Review wrote extensively about the John Birch Society, more or less putting it in a better perspective. And I might phrase that as that they separated themselves from the John Birch Society.
I think that was in 1962 that the...
No, the article that I'm referring to is about 10 years ago, long before you came with the magazine. But
I've been with the magazine 12 years.
12. Oh, I see. I thought they said 2 years.
No.
Excuse me.
No.
Okay. The one question I don't want you to talk about while I'm on the phone necessarily, but I don't want to forget it, is you apparently were a graduate of Eastern Michigan.
That's right.
Do you think Phil Crane can ever come back and be a presidential candidate again?
I don't know. I haven't heard much about him lately. I think very highly of him. I've never met the man.
I see. The reason I associated the two of you is because I believe that he was also a graduate of Eastern Michigan.
I don't think he
Perhaps
was.
he was president of Eastern Michigan.
Okay, we have a lot of other people waiting to get on the line. Could you go ahead with your question?
Anyway, do you feel that the National Review is as ideological as it used to be, as right-wing, or as or as conservative as it was, say, in 1960, or in 1962, or in 1970?
Well, it's not as far from the mainstream as it was. I think that's more a reflection of where the mainstream has gone than of where National Review has gone. There are a lot of things that National Review has come to terms with that now that it hadn't at that time. But there are different things on the agenda now. And actually, we're confronting a more realistic agenda. We're probably less utopian in a certain way than we were then.
This is a picture from the inside of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the bottom of the picture says, "Supporters cheer Geraldine A. Ferraro during her appearance in Johnston Hall at Moravian College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania." Underneath it, "Democrats attack toxic waste policy," a story we've seen on the front page of other newspapers, and it says, "Walter F. Mondale and Geraldine A. Ferraro in separate appearances yesterday accused President Reagan of turning his back on the nation's environmental health problems and failing to clean up toxic waste dumps." Joseph Sobran, what do you think are the major issues in this campaign?
You mean the issues people do care about, or the things they should care about? I don't think.
Let's ask on both. First off, which do they care about, and second, which should they care about?
Well, I would put abortion near the top of the list. I think that's an extremely central issue. Yeah, I agree with the Archbishop O'Connor of New York entirely on that. That's not a single issue, it's a central issue. It determines what kind of society we're going to be. So I'd put that very high. Now, there are, of course, a lot depends on your specific circumstance. In self-defense, if you live next door to the toxic waste dump, as they say, you're likely to vote on that. Now, what amused me really about the debate the other night between the Vice President and Geraldine Ferraro was that she would introduce this sort of theme into her peroration. In effect, the Vice President sang "America the Beautiful," and she started talking about toxic waste. And it struck me as the Democratic obsessiveness on this sort of issue. There is a strong environmentalist constituency, which is to a great extent ideological rather than actually self-defensive. And she was appealing to that at a moment when she should have been appealing to the whole country. So I thought that was inept and typical of the Democratic approach, which is to woo as many special interest groups as possible and try to weld them into a majority. Politics doesn't really work like that.
Oswego, New York, I believe I pronounced that correctly. You're our next caller. Do you have your morning newspaper?
I don't get the morning, I get the evening, and I get quite a few newspapers.
How many do you receive?
Oh, I get USA Today, I get the Syracuse Herald, I get the Pale Times, I get the Spotlight, I get the Oswego Valley, I get the New York Times.
Let me ask you, is the Syracuse Times? What's
the Herald Journal.
I see.
Herald Journal.
Is that a morning paper?
They have a Post Standard that's the morning, so I get the evening because they both carry pretty much the same.
I see. Did you have a question or a comment for Joseph Sobran?
Well, I had a comment about what he said about the people reading the paper to get ammunition, and they don't read it to get informed. I happen to fall into that category because I did start buying the newspaper to get informed, and I haven't found a newspaper yet, with the exception of maybe USA Today, that presents an information education type of balance. I feel that there's some kind of view molding going on there, and I really resent that because I do seek for education and information along with entertainment in my newspaper. And I've written quite a few letters to the editors, and I'm quite involved in issues. And that's why I do know this sort of thing firsthand, because I come from a small town, and I have started some kind of anti-pornography movement here. So I've been in touch with quite a few media, newspaper, radio, and television.
Well, let me ask you, USA Today, do you think it's a thorough newspaper?
I don't think it's thorough, but I do think whatever they do present it in a sort of a balance. I don't think they cover enough, but I think that if a negative, you're going to find a positive presentation on the same subject.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's equally presented, where most of the papers I've read have either got negative, one positive, all positive, no negative. You know, there's no balance. And I've come across that quite a bit, and that's why I think people are reading newspapers for ammunition, as he said, but it's not our fault that it lays that way. I think it's the responsibilities on the newspapers, because I certainly believe that the media can either break or make a situation. And when they take advantage of that, I think it's an abuse on the general public.
All right. New York, thanks for the call. Joseph Sobran, what do you think?
Well, I shouldn't have said ammunition. I think I should say reinforcement of a sort. I mean, we do want to be informed. We do want to know what the other side has to say, but we generally have our own side in a certain way, even if we're not aware of it. I think the newspapers often aren't aware of their own commitments. For instance, I used to keep track of the New York Times in particular, because it had a certain way of referring to heads of state. Those that it approved of, in a sense, would be called by different titles than those that disapproved of. For instance, communist dictators were always called leaders. Cuban leader, Castro. Soviet leader, Brezhnev. Chinese leader, Mao Zedong. Philippine dictator, Marcos. Argentine strongman, such and such. So that the dictators it disapproved of were given negative names, and the dictators that approved of were always leaders.
You brought up the issue of abortion as a central issue in this campaign, and I held up the front page of the New York Times. Picture of Archbishop John J. O'Connor speaking yesterday in Manhattan, and the story says, "Fight abortion," O'Connor urges public officials. Archbishop John J. O'Connor said yesterday that Roman Catholic bishops expected public officials and candidates for election to publicly oppose, quote, "abortion on demand," end of quote, and, quote, "work for modification," end of quote, of legalized abortion. Also on the inside of the New York Times, and I'm going to drop this paper and show you a full-page ad also dealing with abortion. I don't know what it costs to take out a full-page ad in the New York Times. Full-page ad taken out by Planned Parenthood, and you see the picture, and the caption says, "If you agree that every child should be loved, shouldn't you support a woman's right to abortion?" Is this issue going to be heating up as the election goes on?
I don't think that will be heating up. I think it's a kind of constant. I think it's one of those issues that makes everything that comes from now on sort of irrelevant unless each candidate changes his views, which is very unlikely, of course. So I think that has already cleaved the nation in a certain way. The people who are against it have already made up their minds for Reagan. The people who are for it have made up their minds for Mondale, pretty much.
Seattle, Washington, good morning. Do you have your morning newspaper?
No, a little bit early out here, and I'll be getting it in about an hour.
Okay, what is it, 6:25 out there?
Yes.
Do you have a question for Joseph Sobran?
Well, first I want to say I'm one of his fans, but I don't
Thank
see
you.
his columns in the newspapers often enough.
Thank you, sir.
I like how he, once in a while, deflates the Democrats. And because he writes, he must read a lot. I wonder if it's just me, or has he noticed that in the wire services, like AP and that, sometimes Reagan will make a statement or do this, and AP will have two paragraphs in there of what research they've done that contradicts what Reagan is saying, and yet I never see this where the Democrats are concerned. That lady that's running for vice president, many times she said that corporations used to pay more than individuals of the share of the federal income taxes, and she says now people pay more than corporations. But nobody's ever taken her to task and said that was brought about because of the lack of indexing, which she is against. So she's telling the truth, the facts, but she's not saying the why. And my own opinion is all we getting in her is good-looking Tip O'Neill. And I'll hang up and listen to you now.
All right, thanks for the call. Any response, Joseph Sobran?
Well, I noticed, for instance, in the debate the other night, both candidates had their moments of incoherence. I watched it with friends, and we all looked at each other afterward and said, who won the Reagan-Mondale debate? And we all sort of shrugged. Reagan wasn't as good as we'd expected. Mondale was better, but we didn't think that made it a Mondale victory in any important sense. It was only a couple of days later that this sort of media consensus arose that not only had Reagan lost, but he was showing his age. Now, the answer that Mr. Mondale gave on the religion issue, did he only object to conservative ministers getting involved in politics, if you read it, was a flustered, incoherent answer. Nobody raised the age issue with Mr. Mondale. Dr. Johnson once, Samuel Johnson once said, when a young man walks out of the room without his hat, people say he forgot his hat. When an old man walks out without his hat, they say his mind is going. And that was what happened to the president. Now, if Mondale had gotten the same kind of treatment, he would be committing gaffes too. A gaffe, in a sense, is a little mistake that's magnified by the media. And that's why Reagan commits so many more gaffes than other people do. Everybody makes little mistakes. Only Reagan gets them magnified to this extent.
Just the other day, Mr. Herbert Bloch was on the show, and he's a political cartoonist for the Washington Post, and I'm going to hold you up today's cartoon, and you see President Reagan standing here with Vice President Bush standing at the side, and a briefcase that says groveling George VP, and up at the top it says there's a definite coattail factor here anyhow. Two aides talking. Now I show you this cartoon, and I'll ask our director to take a shot of that, because Joseph Sobran, in this most recent edition of the National Review, does a critique of Herb Bloch's most recent book, Looking Glass, and this is what he has to say about Herb Bloch. It says, quote, "His draftsmanship is mediocre and unimaginative, stiff characters stand and talk, looking bland, surprised, or villainous. Not much happens. This isn't really visual art. The pictures are there to hang words on, and Herb Bloch overuses the privilege of labeling objects in the picture." How do you really feel about Herb Bloch, Joseph Sobran?
Well, just what I said. He's not the kind of cartoonist who relies on the visual as such. There are very few of his cartoons that can do without all the words. And he's the wordiest cartoonist around, I think. I've counted as many as 87 words in a single cartoon. Doesn't leave much room for the drawing.
This is Joseph Sobran's column, a critique of Herb Bloch's book, The Looking Glass, in the most recent issue of the National Review. Phone lines are open. Let's go to San Antonio, Texas. Do you have your morning newspaper?
Yes, I do. It's the San Antonio Light. It's not much of a newspaper, but it'll do today.
What's on the front page of the paper today?
Okay, well, a couple of headlines on national headlines are Salvador takes peace step, Reagan's lead shrinking as stars wait for battle. But I've got some more interesting headlines inside. Former LBJA testifies in CBS suit. Thatcher cites IRA bombers as example of evil. Catholics reject Ferraro as dinner speaker. Mother Teresa joins anti-abortion campaign. Reagan, Kennedy would be ashamed. President accused of ignoring waste. Ad campaign fights moral McCarthyism. That's by a former Alabama congressman who supports Ronald Reagan for re-election but blasted fundamentalist television evangelists for moral McCarthyism. Clements, former Governor Clements of Texas, says presidential race is neck and neck in Texas.
Colin, let me ask you, don't go any further. What do you think of that? Is that presidential race neck and neck in the state of Texas?
Well, during his re-election campaign up to the last day, the day before, he was supposed to be 6, 7, or 8 points ahead, according to his pollster, and he lost, and he lost pretty handily. So I don't know. There was a big registration drive. The Republicans are supposed to have surprised a lot of people, but I think it still could be close, especially after the second debate. If Mr. Reagan does not perform any better than he did. But I've got a couple of questions. I'm wondering a question about the Thatcher bombing. I thought the media should have handled it a bit more as a more important event, as a top story. Yet on several broadcasts, it was relegated to the third or fourth story. He was a very important leader in the world politics, and yet it was treated as something other than that. I thought it would have been, even though the debate wasn't that day, the vice presidential debate, I thought it might have been the first story or even the second story, but yet on a couple of networks it was the fourth story, and yet in the following day it wasn't given as much eminence as I thought it should have been. And another comment, I read in an editorial, a letter to the editor, that Mr. Mondale once compared the United States to South Africa. That was in 1971. It was a quote by a very prolific letter writer who hasn't been, no one has rejected that statement, and I'm wondering if that statement is true. And I'm wondering about Mr. David Ifshin, why Mr. David Ifshin hasn't been made a topic in this campaign by either Mr. Bush or Mr. Reagan. Thank you.
Thanks for the call. Mr. Sobran, any response to that?
Yeah, the David Ifshin is a legal advisor to the Mondale campaign. He went to Hanoi in the early 70s, I think it was in 1972, and signed what they call the People's Peace Treaty, virtually surrendering on behalf of the United States, denouncing the United States, giving aid and comfort to the communist regime of North Vietnam. Now, he says he's sorry now, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder if this would be bought if he were a Republican who'd done a similar thing. I doubt it. I really think the media have moved into, especially the three networks in their news coverage, the New York Times and the Washington Post, have moved into high gear to beat Reagan. I've been really amazed at how biased the coverage has been in the last few weeks. Just again and again, just distortions, misemphasis, all sorts of things that just don't become newspapers that and news organizations that purport to be giving you reports, neutral information. That's not what they're giving. And the neglect of this Ifshin story, a potentially hot one, is part of it. Of course, the Republicans, as this man said, haven't capitalized on it. I don't know why. That's how they are.
The New York Times Magazine on Sunday had a big article about Reagan and the press, basically saying that Reagan's advisors were allowing a lot of photo opportunities, a lot of pictures of the president, but no in-depth interviews, that the aides were keeping the press away from the press to protect the president. What did you think of it? Did you read it, and what do you think of that?
No, I didn't read that, but I know they're doing that, and I would too in their place. You know, Mr. Reagan really isn't cut out to be a debater. More than that, most of the questions that he's asked come from the left. Mondale isn't pressed the same way. No liberal is the way conservative is. That's just the way it is. That's how the press is biased. And you know, there are lots of signs of it. A conservative has to defend his whole philosophy in this sort of situation, whereas the liberal's philosophy is taken as a given.
Back to the phones. Los Angeles, California. Do you have the LA Times this morning?
No, I get the Herald.
Okay, what's on the front page of the Herald today?
The Herald is LA officials promise swift counterattack on gang terror because of the recent gang wars. And in the right-hand column, there's a picture of Bush. So much for my needing to apologize, Bush declares, with his speech at the Century Plaza and the dictionary. And my question for Mr. Sobran spins off of that. And I just wondered if, I think we're all sure that Mondale is going to hit that in the next debate, probably as much as he hit the deficits in the first debate. What advice would you give the president in response to that attack that he's going to get? And in general, what strategy do you think he should adapt for the foreign policy debate? I'll get off.
Thanks for the call.
Well, in general, I think he ought to be aggressive. On this point in particular, I think Mr. Bush has a point that humiliation and shame are synonyms. Now, the Democrats, if I were in his place, I'd ask, first of all, why the Democrats in recent years have been so eager to give the Soviets and the Sandinistas the benefit of doubt to the extent of writing an absolutely fawning letter to Daniel Ortega, head of the Sandinista junta in Nicaragua a few months ago. Their record in general has been one of trashing this administration, and by implication the old bipartisan consensus which Reagan is invoking when he appeals to Kennedy and Truman, as he does. I'd also ask Mr. Mondale why he was so indignant about this remark and so unindignant about Jesse Jackson's Jaime remark. I mean, there have been lots of things in his own party he could have criticized if he's interested in upholding standards of civility. He's so partisan. There doesn't seem to be anything in Mr. Mondale that's extra political. It all comes out of partisanship. So that's why he is relatively unembarrassed and unflustered in debate. He's always appealing to special interests. He gets indignant about the things the party line prescribes indignation for, and that's it.
Back to the phones. Morristown, New Jersey. You're our next caller. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Do you have your morning newspaper?
No, morning paper hasn't come yet, but I've been watching cable network news all night.
You have? What is this? What does the cable network news have to say?
Well, I was particularly interested in the follow-up on Vice President Bush's statement about the Marines. It seems to me that Mr. Mondale and Ms. Ferraro said that the United States was humiliated in Lebanon, and that Mr. Bush accused him of suggesting that the Marines died in shame. Now, as the commander-in-chief, the president is responsible for the lives of his men, and they're dead because their base was never properly secured. Now, to be unprepared once was negligent, but letting it happen a second and third time, that was a shameful lack of leadership at the highest level. And when Mr. Bush attempted to fix that shame on the dead Marines and make political gain by pretending that Mondale said it, now, they knew that that wasn't true, and apologies should have been made. But after repeated failures to protect Marine lives, President Reagan is now refusing to preserve their honor. Now, they talk about shame, but they don't apparently have any.
Okay, thanks for the call. Let's get a comment from Joseph Sobran. Any response?
Well, I mean, we saw the other caller just mentioned Mrs. Thatcher nearly being killed by a bombing. I don't know, to what extent you can prevent this sort of thing from happening. The English have controlled Brighton for many years now, and nevertheless a bomb went off in Brighton that nearly killed the Prime Minister. Bill Buckley pointed out the other day in his column that Governor Cuomo in New York was sleeping in a house as it was burglarized. If the governor of New York isn't immune to that sort of thing, it seems to me a little far-fetched to hold the president responsible for every terrorist action that isn't fully anticipated and prepared for all over the world. There's a limited liability, in other words, for these things. The shame remark, I don't know, that troubles me somewhat. I don't know I don't know exactly what Mondale said, so I shouldn't comment. He used the word humiliation. I guess that isn't disputed. What's the sentence? Do you have
I don't remember
have
the
it
sentence, but I believe he's referring to last Thursday's debate when Vice President George Bush was referring to.
Bush, though, was referring to a remark by Mondale that included the word humiliation.
That I don't know the exact quote.
Yeah, well, who is humiliated? They died in humiliation, in effect? Is that what he said? I don't know.
Hold up the inside of the New York Times, and they have a story today about what the candidates are doing, and I'll read it for you so you know where all four of them are today. It says, the candidates today, before immersing himself in preparations for the debate Sunday night, President Reagan returns to the road today, visiting a career education center in Will County and attending a rally at the College of DuPage, both in Illinois. He then returns to Washington. His rival, Walter F. Mondale, will be in California. His schedule includes a talk at Stanford University in Palo Alto and a Democratic Party in Beverly Hills. Geraldine A. Ferraro's schedule begins with a speech at the City Club in Cleveland. After a rally at the State House in Springfield, Illinois, she will fly to California to join the party in Beverly Hills. And then Vice President Bush will also be in California, visiting a farm in Bakersfield and participating in a community forum in Sacramento. He will spend the night in San Francisco. Inside of the New York Times today, speaking with Joseph Sobran. Next call is from Concord, California. You're not far from Palo Alto, are you?
No, I'm not. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Are you going to be listening? I'm trying to think. It's Walter Mondale is going to be speaking at Stanford. You planning on going over there?
Well, I'm on vacation. I was thinking about it, but if it were Senator Proxmire, I would definitely be there. I'd like to speak a little bit about the missile deployment in Western Europe and why Mr. Mondale or President Reagan, why they're not talking about it.
What about it?
Perhaps your commentator, your guest, could give us a little bit of his thoughts and opinions on the situation.
What do you think about the deployment of the cruise missiles in West Germany or in Western Europe as a whole?
Well, the Netherlands has come out against any more missile deployments in their country. So I think that the candidates should address the problem and make the issue known before the American people so they can make a wise decision on which candidate would provide the strong leadership.
Do you think we should have put those cruise missiles into West Europe?
I really think we should, because if all the instances of Russian aggression since the Carter administration has constantly been stepped up, they're not showing any inclination of backing down.
Okay, Concord, California, thanks for the call. Joseph Sobran.
Well, on the business of arms control in general and arms buildups, there's a tendency in the Democrats, very strong, in the leadership particularly, and we saw it in Mrs. Ferraro the other night, we've seen it constantly in Walter Mondale, to identify the problem in arms themselves. It's kind of platitudinous, as if weapons in themselves constituted the principal danger. Somebody remarked the other day that when Genghis Khan was on the march, Genghis Khan was the problem, not the arrows and the spears. Same with Attila the Hun. When Hitler was on the march, it wasn't his weapons, it wasn't tanks that were the problem. A lot of people identified it that way, but it's the will behind it. Now we're facing a totalitarian communist empire. It's very aggressive. It's said so repeatedly, it's proved it repeatedly. And I don't know why they can't identify this as the principal problem. You know, anyone can get an arms control agreement. Very easy. All you have to do is give the other side everything at once, and they'll sign the paper. And you can come home waving it triumphantly. You can even get a kiss from the Soviet leader, as the New York Times would call him. But that's not leadership. That's not what we need. It's not a correct analysis of the situation. It's the Soviet system that we're up against, not just weapons. Britain and France are both nuclear powers. These are two countries that have never been crazy about each other. They fought a lot of wars, but they're both civilized. Their weapons don't threaten each other. It's the Soviet Union that's entirely based on force, terror, and lies. That system is evil, right to its roots. The president was right about that. It's inhuman, and if you don't address that first, you can't talk intelligibly about arms control, in my opinion.
I'm going to hold up the inside of the Washington Post, which has an article about what Joseph Sobran was just referring to. On the inside, and it's page 6, it says, Reagan doesn't claim, quote, evil empire remark. President Reagan suggested in a magazine interview released this week that he never called the Soviet Union a, quote, evil empire. Asked by U.S. News and World Report how he could expect the Soviet Union to negotiate an arms control agreement, quote, after you've denounced them as liars and cheats who run an evil empire, end of quote, Reagan said, quote, those weren't my words. He added, quote, I was only reciting what they had said, end of quote. What about that evil empire remark, Joseph Sobran?
Well, he did say that. What he evidently means in that interview, in that statement there, is that he didn't say they lie and cheat. He said they reserve to themselves the right to lie and cheat. In other words, an exemption from ordinary civil morality, where you tell the truth to other people and you don't cheat. You know, they regard this as what they call bourgeois morality. Lenin said it, and they've always lived by that. Their behavior has been consistent. They don't have inner moral inhibitions. They use moral language only for the purpose of inhibiting us, paralyzing us. They don't believe in that stuff themselves at all.
Richmond, Virginia, do you have the Post-Dispatch? Is that the name of the Richmond paper?
It's the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and I don't have it this morning. I haven't been out. I've called in sick today, and I'm not feeling that well.
Sorry to hear you're not feeling well. Question from Mr. Sobran.
I was interested in two quick questions. One, on journalistic ethics. I notice a lot of reports in the press that don't really come true, but then you never see retractions, and or if you do, they're on the back pages. One question, does he think it's ethical? I think it is, but does he think it is to have to retract or correct in the same rough format and in the same location that your original erroneous article was placed? If you made a mistake on the front page, you retract on the front page. That's one. And two, I agree with him on the massive press tilt to salvage the campaign of Walter Mondale. There's been a really selective amnesia in the press about all these Mondale positions that have flip-flopped. Like in 1980, he campaigned for Jimmy Carter and himself that they were doing enough. An example was the MX missile as a deterrent weapon that they were in favor of. Now Mondale's flip-flopped and says, you know, he's against the MX. You know, I'm just wondering, are there more examples that he knows of Mondale's flip-flops, and does he think that Mondale is receiving the same treatment that Reagan would have received if Reagan had been flip-flopping all over these issues? Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call. I'm going to hold up the Post, and this is how they print their corrections. And it's on page A3, and you see corrections. A report October 4th incorrectly stated that the Archivist of the United States is subject to Senate confirmation. Joseph Sobran, a response to the caller's question.
That's a very witty idea to force them to put the correction in the same place where the error occurred. They could take a little box on page 1, right near the top of the page at times, to make a correction. Nobody would do that, of course. It would be very damaging to newspaper credibility. And well, they aren't infallible. We can't blame them for every inaccuracy. But I think they ought to take more responsibility on the matter of predictions that come out wrong. I was thinking a little while ago of the 1980 prediction that the election would be a cliffhanger. one of the biggest landslides against an incumbent in American history. And the press was totally out of touch on that. The pollsters were all wrong, and it didn't seem to affect their assertiveness in any way. It certainly should have. On the matter of Mondale, yes, he gets away with all sorts of things that Reagan would never get away with. I repeat, a few years ago, for instance, he was calling himself a humanist. His brother Lester, you know, is one of the leading secular humanists in the U.S. He signed the first and second humanist manifestos. And Mondale was calling himself a humanist. Now he's calling himself a Christian. Is that a flip-flop? That seems to me to deserve at least as much attention as the president's failure to attend church regularly.
This is the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer and a picture of Walt Rostow, and the headline on it says, "First Witness in Westmoreland Case Says LBJ Not Misled About Troops." And the story says, Dateline New York, Walter W. Rostow, President Lyndon B. Johnson's national security advisor during the Vietnam War, contradicted yesterday in federal court certain allegations made during a 1982 CBS documentary on the war. And I show you that, I'm going to ask Sterling to pull out a little bit, and I'm going to drop this page and then show you the editorial page of Washington Times. And this is an editorial cartoon by Garner, and it's pretty self-explanatory as we take a close look at it. Joseph Sobran, what do you think of this, CBS versus General Westmoreland?
Well, it's going to bring a lot of things out in the open, I suppose. Each side is going to bring out a lot of dirty laundry on the other. I don't know, though. I haven't followed the case in detail, so I don't know which side is in the right, or to what degree each side is. I suppose neither is 100% right. I don't know. I always assumed that to begin with.
The Washington Times commentary page today has that as its lead, and the whole front page, it says, "Beyond the video screen, a picture of Mike Wallace, 60 Minutes," and the story just below it. Let's go back to the phones. Los Angeles, California, you're on the air. Do you have the Los Angeles Times with you?
Yes, I do.
What's on the front page?
It says Duarte guerrillas hold peace talks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about. Okay, I want to ask Mr. Sobran if he thinks that the Duarte guerrilla peace talks allow spillover effect that is favorable to the Reagan campaign. And if so, how will this be used in the campaign in regards to the president's standing on foreign policy in Latin America and less developed countries in general?
Well, I don't know how it will affect the campaign, really, or if it'll affect it very much. As I say, I think it's essentially been decided. I think to the extent it has an effect, it'll be reassuring to people who've been worried by a lot of rather apocalyptic talk about war in Central America. I don't really believe that peace talks really settle anything. I think that the peace talks really occur when things have been settled. Nobody gives up an advantage against a real enemy simply because he would like peace. Not if he's in his in the normal. How should I say? Not if he's an ordinary human being. Most people want to press the advantage and vanquish the enemy if they have the chance, if they think they're right, and most people do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be fighting in the first place.
Front page of the New York Times, it says, "Younger voters tending to give Reagan support," story by Stephen Roberts, Stateline, Washington. In the late 1960s, the rallying cry for many young Americans was, quote, "Don't trust anyone over 30," end of quote. In 1984, by contrast, the youth culture appears to put its trust in a president who is over 70. Ronald Reagan, at the age of 73, the oldest president, is more popular with young voters than with any other age group, according to a number of polls. Many disagree with some of his policies, but he is coming across to young people as a firm yet kindly grandfather figure, a leader who inspires confidence in an uncertain world. Joseph Sobran, is Americans' young people becoming more conservative?
Not too much. I think they always were. I remember in the 60s when it was the radicals who got all the attention and the publicity, but that was a matter of this, the big sound effects process, not a matter of the real layout of opinion. George Wallace was strongest among young voters, and there's a simple reason for that, and that's simplicity itself. Reagan does have a rather simple message. You can say it's simplistic or you can say it's principled, but in any case, it's not hard to understand. whereas Walter Mondale seems to have a lot more ambiguity about him, and that you may see that as a virtue or a vice. But he doesn't convey a simple, apprehensible message the way Reagan does.
West Patterson, New Jersey, you're our next caller. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. How you doing?
Fine. Yourself?
Good. I have on my paper here this morning one issue that is the true issue in so far since Reagan's been president. Paychecks, smallest increases in years. Since he's been president, the working man has taken wage freezes, pay cuts, loss in benefits, loss in jobs. Now, your guest there, as far as the abortion issue, when Reagan ran for governor of California, the abortion issue was the big thing. So he was all for it. And when he got elected, he passed the easiest abortion laws in the history of any state in the country. So I got a comment on why Reagan's so strong. I watched the debate on your program between Helms and Hunt. Hunt said to Helms, you passed a bill to help the oil companies, a bill to help the chemical companies. You voted against more money for toxic waste. And you even brought up a suggestion to do away with Social Security for private pension plans. And I thought they were good issues, that the guy should be elected because he showed what this guy's really about. And if you remember the debate, through the whole hour, what did Senator Helms say to Governor Hunt? He said, isn't it true you ran an ad in the black newspaper that you were for the Martin Luther King holiday? And I'm white, middle-class American, U.S. postal worker. And no matter where I go, talk to my friends or anything, the true issue in this campaign is what my friends all say. Vote for Ronald Reagan because he's against the minorities. And that's what the Conservative Party done in this country. That's what this election's all about. It's not about anything else. You know, our contract was due in July, the U.S. Postal Service. We haven't had a signed contract yet. You know why? They want to stall it to after the election because Ronald Reagan and the Postal Commission offered us a 3-year wage freeze, a 23% cut in pay for any new employees after coming on in '85. Now, they're stalling it so we can go by the way of the air controllers if we dare to stand up against this contract.
All right, West Patterson, New Jersey, thanks for the call. Joseph Sobran.
Well, he said so many things I hardly know where to start. But, well, let's pick up this idea that the Conservative Party is against minorities. I don't know what that means. I mean, nobody's singling out minorities. I think everyone stands for equal treatment under the law. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. Not everyone stands for equal treatment under the law. Some people want favoritism for some groups. And that's generally the so-called liberal position now, that some groups should be indulged at the expense of others. That's special interest politics. And, you know, the thing that Walter Mondale is going to have to learn is that the governing is not an extension of special interest politics. It's more nearly the opposite. When you're in charge of a nation, when you're an executive, it's not your prerogative to indulge some people at the expense of others. You have to treat them impartially. And what he promises precisely is partial treatment.
This is the inside of the Washington Post today, and it's a story. The picture you're looking at says Yale employees Amelia Prostano and Doris Troiano at a union rally last month is the picture. And the story says, pay equity fight at Yale. Strike over women's salary is first major private sector battle. Story Dateline, New Haven, Connecticut. And C-SPAN will be in New Haven next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and we'll look at this strike at Yale University. But the story says Lucille Dickus, the $16,180 a year registrar of Yale University's geology department, never expected to find herself on a picket line shouting slogans against her employer of 16 years. Quote, you reach a point where you have to fight for what you're worth, end of quote, says Dickus, 50, who once belonged to an anti-union committee. Down here, Yale, steeped in a 283-year tradition of scholarship and reason, has become the unlikely battleground in a bitter fight over what many experts see as a major labor and civil rights issue of the 1980s and beyond, quote, pay equity or comparable worth for the lower paid jobs traditionally filled by women. I have about 30 seconds left, but any comment on that story, Joseph Sobran?
Well, the idea of comparable worth is a real can of worms. Who's going to decide what's equivalent to what? Is digging a ditch comparable to being a secretary? I'd rather be a secretary. So how do you decide a thing like that?
Once again, C-SPAN will be up in New Haven next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and as I said, we'll be taking a look at that strike at Yale University, as well as introducing you to some of the politicians of New Haven, Connecticut. Our guest for the last hour has been Joseph Sobran, senior editor with the National Review, a biweekly publication. He's been with them for the last 12 years. Mr. Sobran, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Those of you who have been watching and those of you who have called, we appreciate it, and have a nice day.